Swadika and good evening and welcome to Thai PBS World Tonight. I'm Nabunad.
I'm Tulip Naksomphopla.
And today we're seeing a sudden surge of new COVID-19 infections today, and it's 3 digits once again. The CCSA announced today that Thailand recorded 401 new COVID-19 infections today, and that includes a cluster of 318 infections among illegal immigrants held at Suan Plu and Bang Khen detention centers. However, Public Health Minister Pathum Thani insists that the current surge in new infections is not a sign of a third wave of infections, but just a cluster of infections, and that the situation is under control. Of the new cases today, 383 are local transmissions, including 337 found through proactive screening in communities. The cumulative number of infections since December 15th are 24,040, of which around 22,000 already have recovered. One more death was reported today as well, and that raised the death toll to 92 since early last year. Dr. Ratsadon, the acting chief of the Health Emergency Division of the Disease Control Department, said that city health officials first detected 9 COVID-19 infections at Bang Khen Immigration Detention Center on March 11th, with 52 more cases found 2 days later. 16 more illegal immigrants from Nepal were found to be infected on March 15th, bringing the total number of infections from Nepal in detention to 77. Dr. Ratsadon said the surge of infections among the detained illegal immigrants prompted the Public Health Ministry and city's administration to conduct proactive screening at Bang Khen and Suan Plu immigration centers. Around 1,550 illegal immigrants and officials were tested, and 318 were positive, raising the number of infections in the cluster to 395. Most of them were asymptomatic. Public Health Minister Pathum claimed today that the current surge of new cases is due to cluster infections, not a third wave of the pandemic, adding that most of the cases among illegal immigrants are asymptomatic and they will be cured in about 10 days without the need for antiviral medication. He asked the public not to be worried about the daily number of new infections, but focus on the limited spread instead. The minister gave his assurance that after 1.5 years of fighting with coronavirus, Thai medical personnel have become more experienced and more efficient in coping with it. So that is the latest on the COVID-19 situation, as well as the cluster that came from illegal immigrants here.
So the Public Health Minister insists that it is not the third wave, though yes, the words sound actually a little scary, but it's still in control. So as long as it's in control and as long as it's traceable, I think in theory it's not the third wave.
Yes, because what he actually said is it's just a cluster of new infections in like in a small sort of group. It's not like completely widespread compared to like the very first outbreak here. So he has reassured that the situation is under control and it's not a third wave of infections.
Well, meanwhile, the Thai Tourism Authority actually proposing what is called Sandbox Project. What do you think of when you hear the word sandbox?
Sandbox, as in like in a startup company when you go like fundraising. I have no knowledge on startups anyway, but I've heard of this sandbox term where it's more like, but it's really related to startups and connecting with other people, all these things.
I think here this is where life experience distinguish you and me, because I think of children playground.
Right.
Not like I have more experience when talking about I have a kid, so sandbox make me think of children playground with the sandbox or somewhere by the beach.
Oh, I thought you meant these startup terms, sandbox.
Oh no, I mean it might be that, it just depends on what you think of. But sandbox in this news is actually the name of the project proposed by the Tourism Authority of Thailand. It's a sort of travel bubble, but it's not like between country to country. it's between city to city or island to island. And it will send this idea or this project proposal to the CCSA. And if it's approved, it will be piloted in the resort island of Phuket. The governor of Tourism Authority of Thailand, Yuttasak Supasorn, said that under the Sandbox model, which will be proposed in the meeting on Friday, the Thai government or a Thai city will negotiate with their foreign counterparts to arrange a travel bubble to allow the two sets of citizens who have been vaccinated to visit specific areas without having to be quarantined. He said that Phuket has been chosen as the first city for the trial of the Sandbox model, but authorities concerned must first check the readiness of the private sector and the local people to accept the model, adding that the first group of foreign tourists is likely to be Chinese. Under the Sandbox model, Phuket would bring forward the October timeline to receive the first group of foreign tourists. The TNT governor also said that the authority must check the readiness of the foreign countries or cities as well, which with the Sandbox model will be applied, adding that he would prefer European tourists because they tend to have more purchasing power. But I gotta say though, maybe it depends on how we set the pricing and how we market it. Even though it's a Chinese tourists with a big budget of travel, we might be able to attract them as well.
Okay, that's pretty interesting, and we can see that there are a lot of projects going on to attract more tourists coming back to Thailand, especially now that many countries have their own population being vaccinated. So we can see that Thailand has been stepping up with the tourism schemes and all these things.
The other one was like what, villas?
Yeah,
quarantine?
the area quarantine,
right.
Villa quarantine, all these things, and the Sandbox project will be proposed to the CCSA. And now let's move on to the issue of vaccines. It has been reported that inactivated Thai vaccines are expected to be approved by the end of this year and will begin manufacturing by next year. The government pharmaceutical organization and Mahidol University's Faculty of Tropical Medicine have developed and are about to start human trials of an inactivated virus COVID-19 vaccine. The participating volunteers must be in good health, have never been affected with COVID-19, and have no drug or vaccine allergies. The human trials are divided into two phases. For the first phase, 210 volunteers aged 18 to 59 will be vaccinated, and then scientists will analyze the data to develop two vaccine types for the phase 2 trials, which will begin in July, and that is where 250 volunteers aged 18 to 75 will be involved. The government pharmaceutical organization will start producing the vaccines after it has been approved and registered with the Food and Drug Administration. It is also expected to produce at between 25 and 30 million doses a year after manufacturing begins in 2022.
I think that's a good news. It's coming pretty close because 2022, it just like what,
It's
nine months
Yeah.
away. So that is pretty close, and by that time, half of the population supposedly be inoculated already. So I think it's good, and it's because it's manufactured in Thailand, the cost should be lower than the import one.
Definitely.
And let's change the subject to the protest. What happened during the weekend? Some people will call it a violent protest, or some people will call it a violent crackdown. Depends on which lens you see the situation through.
Yes.
But I think this is not that often that we will see the media organization considering bringing the lawsuit against the police department. The Prachathai, the online news outlet, is to file a lawsuit against the police after their reporter was hit with rubber bullets during Saturday's protest. Prachathai reporter Sarayut Tengprasert was reportedly hit twice while covering the event, where anti-riot police fired rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse the crowds. Sarayut said that the Royal Thai Police will be sued for using crowd control methods which do not comply with the international standards, leading to a number of reporters being injured. The lawsuit demands compensation for the medical expenses incurred and protection of the media. An online discussion among journalists from a different news outlet who reported on the protest. It happened in the new social application called Clubhouse. These reporters came from Prachathai, Thai PBS, Thai Rat, The Matter, Workpoint, and a criminologist was held last night after the incident. So the National Police Chief actually, before last night, came out and offered an apology for the police rough handling of some protesters at Sanam Luang last Saturday. He, the Police Chief Police General Suwat Jang Yotsuk, admitted that some mistakes were made on the part of the police and promised to make changes, adding that he would prefer not to see similar occurrences at the future protests. He wasn't really specified or what is the quote-unquote similar occurrences in the future protests, what it is.
Yeah, he didn't really specify like what exactly that will not happen again, because based on the reports, the riot police used tear gas and what else, the rubber bullets and water cannons, all these things. And we've seen this a couple of times when there was like a crackdown last year, if we all remember, and this time round is not any different.
The thing is, when you talk about international standard, I just start to wondering where is the guideline that we can officially look at for the international standard, giving warning and then followed by the high water pressure cannon and followed by tear gas and followed by rubber bullets, or I don't know, there must be some kind of guideline or something if they keep referring to international standard.
And if the international standards are actually there and if they're widely available, it somehow depends on how each country will interpret this as well, because at what stage you will use tear gas, at what stage you will use the rubber bullets or water cannons, all these things, but for which case? And the case that might be specified in the international standards would be different country to country as well.
I was about to say that. If you, let's say, use the chemical laced water that maybe another 2 countries or 1 country used, and you can just say this is an international standard because there were other countries using it, but what are we referring to?
Exactly. And so let's say if you would use this kind of weapon for this type of unrest. And what does unrest mean to different countries? Like for Thailand might be one thing, but for Myanmar or other countries would be another thing. And you can and if you've been keeping up with the news, the protests in Thailand and in Myanmar are completely different and with different causes as well. So that would be open to interpretation as well.
According to police, they say they always give warning before they move on to the next step.
Yeah.
But according to news report, they heard the warning. Even the police even warned the reporters to get out of that front line or things like that.
And based on the Clubhouse session that they actually discussed last night, some people were discussing whether wearing the armbands that identify if you're the media or the press or not, whether it determines people's safety when reporting such incidents, all these things.
The thing is, if we talk about rubber bullet, if they use rubber bullet like aimed directly at each person, then your armband will help you, because if they're starting to aim at you and they see the armband, it's like, okay, move to something else. But if they, like, let's say, shoot the bullets without really aiming to anyone specifically, then they don't really, that thing is not going to help you. But that's why the police officer told the reporters to just like get out of the area.
Right, but that was one of the topics that were discussed during the Clubhouse session. They also talked about how the police actually mistreated them. Like there have been cases where like some of the reporters were pushed out of the protest site and other things that we could not remember because there are tons of topics that were discussed at that time.
Were
as
you
well.
there in the discussion
I
room?
listened to only a bit of it, but I only read, and after that I read a summary, sort of a summary, and one of the things that they mentioned was the safety of reporters,
Right.
whether the armed man would keep them safe from being attacked by authorities or the protesters or all sorts of things. And most of them actually shared their experience of
Right.
reporting at the protest site.
Sometimes it actually single you out when some protest site or some police officer don't like reporters. Sometimes it single you out when
Yeah.
they don't like something you report, or when you start to report something, they're just gonna stand there and try to listen what you were actually reporting and what would be something they want to hear.
Exactly, and some of them actually said that there were some officials telling them not to film the incident as
Right.
well, but we cannot really confirm this because it was in a clubhouse session, so we
Right.
cannot really identify whether it's actually being said or not.
Okay, let's move on to the next news. Still
Yep.
involve the protests.
Yes, and it involves Penguin, who's a remanded Ratsadon core leader who has been found guilty of contempt of court by the criminal court on Monday. So far, Thanakrit Jit Arirat, the secretary to Justice Minister Somsak Thepsutin, said today that the transfer of remanded Ratsadon core leader Parit Tiwarak, also known as Penguin, from Bangkok remand prison to the detention center in Pathum Thani province on Monday night is in line with the Corrections Department's regulations for treating those sentenced to detention by the court. Parit was found guilty of contempt of court by the criminal court on Monday and sentenced to 1-month detention, but the sentence was commuted to 15 days because of his confession and because he has no previous convictions. Thanakrit said that once Parit has completed the 15-day detention, he will be transferred back to Bangkok remand prison. Commenting on Parit's claim that prison officers prevented his mother from sending him textbooks so he can study while in detention, Thanakrit said that it might be a misunderstanding on the detainee's part, saying that anything sent to a person in prison by his or her relatives will first be subjected to searches by prison officers. At the same time, the United Front of Thammasat and demonstration voiced suspicion on Twitter on Monday night over Parit's transfer to Pathum Thani, claiming that neither his lawyer nor his family were notified. And this afternoon, Chana Songkram police will seek a court's permission to detain protester Chu Kiet Sang Wong, who is charged with lèse majesty for allegedly vandalizing the portrait of His Majesty the King in front of the Supreme Court during a protest by the Redem group on Saturday night. And Chu Kiet was arrested last night as well.
Now let's move on to something a little lighter.
Yes, because we've been talking about really intense stories today, COVID-19 and the ongoing protests and the crackdown last night. And I'm pretty sure you want something a little bit lighter and some more feel-good stories, right?
Yeah, it's a feel-good story. It's actually started off sounding a little bit serious because it's involved a cancer patient. If you talk to someone that has cancer, some of them will say that the thing that more evil than the cancer itself is the chemotherapy, because the side effect is, for some people, intolerable. But in this case, the story that we are about to show to you, a mother of a cancer patient stepped in, tried to help her daughter with the teaching job in a community school. Let's take a look.
Many may say that a mother's love is endless, and that proves to be quite true with this veteran educator in Sadao district of Songkhla province, who has stepped up as the substitute teacher for her daughter's class after her daughter had to go through the second stage of chemotherapy and really needed time to regain her strength. The 67-year-old mother and retired teacher is back in the classroom again, and her spirit as a teacher has not diminished over time. Today, Zariya Jompipathong is once again teaching a first-grade classroom at Ban Padang Community School. Her daughter, Panida Jompipathong, who is going through the second stage of breast cancer, fatigue with vomiting and dizziness from the chemotherapy.
คุณแม่เป็นคนแรกนะคะเพราะว่าหลังจากที่เต็งป่วยปุ๊บ ก็คุณแม่เป็นคนดูแลมาโดยตลอดแล้วก็เลยบอกกับแม่ว่าคือลูกไม่ไหวแล้วลูกมีอาการเวียนหัวแล้วก็บวกกับอาเจียนด้วยแม่ก็รีบมาแล้วก็เข้าสอนใจจริงอยากจะให้แม่แค่มาควบคุมชั้นเรียนเฉยๆไม่คิดว่าจะเห็นภาพที่แม่เนี่ยขึ้นกระดานเขียนหนังสือแล้วก็ให้เด็กๆเนี่ยอ่านหนังสือตามคือเป็นกระบวนการจัดการเรียนการสอนในชั้นเรียนเลยอะค่ะ
The school director has been informed of this motherly substitution. Though the daughter is back in the classroom, Daria insists to come in and help, at least until her daughter regains her strength.
We gotta say that this is definitely a strong bond between the mother and the daughter as well, especially that she is going through a very hard time. She got cancer, she has to go through chemotherapy, all these things, and to see her mother stepping in to teach her students, that's very touching.
Even though she already come back and said that she will be okay, the mother insists that she will be there until her daughter fully recover, which is a nice thing actually. Well, any help actually help. Any help actually help.
Yeah,
even though just emotional support, it's help everyone that is in difficult time.
Definitely, because cancer patients or actually anyone needs a lot of support and love, and especially during this difficult time, that is the only thing you could give so that they have some sort of encouragement to move on and fight with their cancer.
Anyway, that's all the news we have for you in this edition of Thai PBS World Tonight. But if you want to know more story, what's going on in Thailand, in-depth analysis, explainer, comprehensive report about some certain topics, or even a special report on situation in Myanmar, we have what's called Myanmar Report, directly from Yangon, from our own correspondent, Myanmar correspondent to be exact. So just get on our website, www.thaipbsworld.com. We also have YouTube, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, TikTok, and IG, Instagram. So you just search for Thai PBS World and we are there.
And that wraps up tonight's edition of Thai PBS World Tonight. Thanks for watching and we'll see you tomorrow. สวัสดีค่ะ